With the Planet Fitness Black Card, you don't just get a great workout, you get a great perk out because your membership is packed with perks. For $1 down and $24.99 a month, you'll get perks like access to any of our 2,400 clean and spacious locations. Bring a friend anytime and both work out with tons of equipment that'll give you that big fitness energy. Relax in the Black Card spa and more. Work out and perk out with the PF Black Card. Join for just $1 down and $24.99 a month.
Join a club near you. Offer ends November 13th.
See Home Club for details.
This is Talkback 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. KGVO, Missoula's news and weather station.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, November 8th, 1 hour Friday edition of Talkback. Talkback this morning brought to you by 123 Seamless Gutters, family owned and operated, serving all of western Montana. They take care of your gutters so you don't have to. And that includes installing gutter guards. Give them a call, 406-240-2669, protecting the foundation of your future. Harrington Surgical Supply, where you can feel confident in their discreet and knowledgeable guidance on a multitude of products and medical supplies that you need. Also brought to you by Y West Storage out at the Y on Two Smokes Way. Now, if you need storage, here's their number, 406-510-0590, because at Y West, they're always making room for you. And by Phillips Janitorial, both cleaning for both your home and your business. No job is too big or small for Phillips Janitorial, 406-260-6617.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Well, a 1 hour edition of Talkback is today. Good morning, Mr. Nick.
Good morning, Peter.
Nick Christensen over there taking care of producing duties here as he does every day on Talkback. And joining us on the phone right now, we have our Missoula County Attorney, Matt Jennings. Matt, good morning and welcome, sir.
Good morning, Peter. Thanks as always for having me. This week we had a pretty average week in Missoula County of only charging 13 felony complaints or informations, as we call them, and that's kind of a pre-COVID level, so we like to see that. But we did have a couple violent offenses involving firearms this week, and that is something that we always really flag because of the potential death or serious bodily injury. And so we had 4 violent crimes against persons. Interesting this week, but we didn't have any endangerment crimes. Usually in that category, we'd include things like felony DUIs, that's somebody having 4 or more driving under the influences, or criminal endangerment, which often also involves driving behavior like a high-speed chase. And we didn't have any this week, so that's kind of nice. We had 2 property crimes. One of those was a robbery, though. We had 7 drug crimes. We continue on a week-to-week basis to have quite a struggle in our community with meth and fentanyl. With the rise of fentanyl, heroin's all but disappeared from our streets because of its cost and difficulty obtaining it, but we just continue to find a lot of folks with fentanyl on their persons, and we take that really seriously because we continue to see overdoses and people having their lives completely ruined by it, and then either out of despair or altering brain chemistry often leads to other criminal behavior. But as I often remind you and some of your listeners, we do try and approach addiction issues in a rehabilitative manner because we often know that if we can get folks to stop consuming drugs and alcohol to the degree that they are, they often commit fewer offenses. They don't act out violently. They don't steal things. And so we have accountability. We sometimes have punishment, but we also really focus on rehabilitation, knowing that can make a big difference. So, that's about it this week, Peter.
Well, I wanted to find out, is there anything special going on in your office that you'd like to highlight? Perhaps some of the work that your fellow county attorneys are doing to try to make Missoula a safer place to live?
Yeah, well, thanks, Peter. October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we had a really nice ceremony a couple weeks ago honoring a lot of the unsung heroes in our community that are always trying to help victims of domestic violence. And we have a special victims unit team here in our office that just has extraordinary expertise. They're some of the best attorneys and prosecutors in the state. They spend a lot of time with victims, and we've been having really incredible results. And we keep growing that team, so we're actually up to 7 members now. And it didn't even exist 10 years ago, but they have this really specialized skill in dealing with some of that. And we've had a lot of success at jury trials. That shows not only their skill, but some of the education that we've been able to accomplish with all our various partners, law enforcement and otherwise, in the community to educate people on domestic violence and how relationships can get in tough spots like that. We do have a couple of trials coming up. We have a homicide trial coming up in early December. I won't get into details on that to not influence any jury pool, but that's going to start on December 3rd, and then we have some other big trials coming up in the new year.
All right. Well, Matt, it's always a pleasure hearing your voice, and thank you for your report, and keep up the good work. We appreciate it, sir.
Thanks so much, Peter. Have a good day.
And the same to you. It is City Talk today, ladies and gentlemen. We are privileged to have with us Ginny Miriam, City of Missoula Communications Director, and Mike Nugent, City Councilor from Ward 4, is joining us this morning. And so we are going to kick that conversation off here in just a moment, as City Talk will begin right after this timeout. There are some relationships.
Dennis Bragg with your weekend weather. Mostly sunny with a few clouds later Friday. Actually a pretty nice day for November with highs in the mid-40s. A few clouds push in Friday night, keeping us just a little warmer for overnight with lows below freezing. For the weekend, we'll start out with a mix of sun and clouds Saturday, but then increasing clouds in the afternoon and a 40% chance of rain later, although it looks like that will be after the Grizz game. Clouds with a 40% chance of rain lasting through Sunday and more persistent rain coming on Veterans Day.
Okay, welcome everybody. Good to have you along this morning. It is City Talk today. I'm Peter Christian, the questions, and over there taking your phone calls, and joining us in the studio this morning, Ginny Miriam, along with Mike Nugent. And Ginny, I know you kind of wanted to make a little bit of an introduction today because we have some very important issues to talk about.
I kind of do. Thank you, Peter.
You bet.
I'm a little bit worked up this morning.
That's okay.
On so many things.
Good.
But, when I think about City Talk, which I do all the time because we're here every 2 weeks with you, I try to think about topics that involve local government at the city that people would be interested in because they are in the news or they're pending or they're coming before City Council. And so I look for that news peg to hang this story on. I have been watching in particular council deliberations that have gone pretty long recently concerning new, larger subdivisions. And every one of those conversations breaks my heart for everybody and everybody's opinions and the emotion that they express.
How so? Yeah.
It's interesting to me because you hear the same things that we heard in the 90s when I was a news reporter writing stories about developments. People say, you're ruining my neighborhood. This is the last bit of open field that we have in our neighborhood. We love to watch the deer and the foxes. Why are you covering it with houses?
Right.
Then you have developers saying, I'm stressed about, I have to make a little bit of profit to pay my employees. That's very difficult in this climate. You have council people who have a decision space that is this wide. I'm holding my fingers 3 inches apart.
just the width of the microphone.
Doesn't really work on radio,
but
who are, Councilman Nugent is particularly in the hot seat as the chair of the Land Use and Planning Committee because he's sitting there listening to people say, just say no to this developer. Well, then you have the property owner who is allowed to develop his or her property. In Montana, we don't tell people you can't develop your property. You have to keep it a ranch or you have to keep it a field. And so I thought, particularly, there were a couple of letters to the editor that we brought this week that showed me that people don't truly understand how it works. And I thought we need to talk about this.
Sure.
And
would you like me to read those letters for you? Or
I think Councilman Nugent is going to be highlighting them.
Mike. Well,
he is the most qualified person
there you go.
To address this in the modern day.
This is great.
Thank you.
Well, Mike, first of all, thanks for taking time to be with us. We appreciate it. I know as a multi-business owner, as a city councilor, you're kind of a busy guy. And for you to take time out of your very busy week to come here and join us, we appreciate it. So please,
absolutely. It's always fun to, be here and hear what your callers have to say.
By the way, the phone lines are open for that. That's why you guys are here, is to take calls from our listeners and their comments and questions. And the lines are open at 721-1290. So we're jumping right in. So go ahead.
So growth is a tough thing because I think there's a thought process among a lot of people who already live here in Missoula that if we just stopped saying yes to projects, that growth would stop. And what we learned, especially during the pandemic, is it's not going to stop people from coming here. It's going to put more pressure on the people who are already here to compete with people who are coming here. And so there are a whole lot of things that go into creating affordable housing. There's a lot of pegs on a stool, but one of them is we have to build housing that people who are coming here or people who already live here are able to purchase and live in. And the misconception is that people think the city goes out and solicits these projects, and that's really not how it works. Most of the time, when housing is developed, it is that somebody who is a private landowner wants to do something different with their land and basically comes and says, what's the process? And state law dictates that the local government, be it the city or the county, have to have a certain process. They have to have zoning. They have to have certain things to kind of guide that. But they can't just artificially restrict what people do on their private property with no basis. And there's a whole lot of case law around takings. So there's a constitutional question there. So it can be frustrating sitting up on city council when people come and basically say, just say no. Why do you hate Missoula? Just say no. And it's like, because that's not the decision space we have. And you can see time and again when local governments, city or counties, have said no to a land use decision that they could not back up in findings of fact and conclusions of law that a court would uphold, they have lost in court, and that's cost the taxpayers money. So you try and do a process that has a growth policy, that does zoning, that does these things. And that's why I think code reform right now is so important in Missoula, because people need to participate in that conversation. But this idea that if a field is open next to you and it's owned privately, that people are going to be able to say you can't do what you want there, it's not really something that aligns with how the law works.
I have had that told to my face. No, seriously, I have a half-acre lot behind my house we haven't developed yet, and I was told many, many years ago by someone who no longer lives in that area that you can't put a house back there. I said, why not? Because it'll block my view of Blue Mountain. I said, okay, well, thank you.
And it's like, don't get me wrong, like I'm born and raised here. Like I appreciate not wanting things to change, and this is something I struggle with quite a bit. But that's just not a realistic expectation. And I think that sometimes when we have these subdivision conversations, people hope that if enough people just come and say we don't want it, that they're going to be able to convince a local government body to just say, okay, fine. But that's going to put the whole community in a lot more potential financial trouble.
Well, that puts every neighbor in every neighborhood in a position of strength to say, no, we're not going to, if they just come in and complain, if you accede to every one of those, then there's no growth at all.
Yeah, and there have been a couple of letters to the editors since the last time. So
yeah.
I'll take a stab at these two real quick.
Please do.
They were, I think, in Tuesday's Missoulian. The first one's called Ruining Missoula, and it says, I see yet another council approval of yet another subdivision. The city council appears to be determined to ruin Missoula as much as possible in the next few years. More people, more houses, more streets, more traffic, more noise, more lights, and the continued development of open spaces. Why do Missoulians continue to put up with this? Missoula does not need growth. In the next few years, the qualities that make the city a desirable place to live will be gone. What is with this mania for growth, and how will our lives be improved by it? That's one of them.
Okay.
And I think that there's a lot to unpack there.
Please do.
But the first
we have 2 minutes before a break, so please feel free.
The first big thing there is that this idea that if we just start saying no to housing starts, that life for people who live in Missoula is going to get easier is just flat out wrong. I mean, I do a lot of things, and obviously I serve on the city council, but I also work in the housing world. And when there's an inventory issue, when there's less houses available than there are people looking to purchase, that drives houses up. And we saw during the pandemic when more people were coming here than we had inventory, which was actually a problem prior to the pandemic, houses just skyrocketed to a point that, I mean, I don't know what we do to claw some of that back, but the idea that that isn't going to happen if we just kind of say, all right, no more building. But what's going to happen is that the homes that are already here are going to skyrocket in value, and anybody growing up here, anybody who's trying to start out in life, anybody who's moving here to work an entry-level job, our teachers, our firefighters, all those people are going to struggle to be able to afford to live here. And we're seeing it on council. We've had to move the boundaries by where our first responders can live farther out of town so that they can afford to buy houses. And so the conversation is more complicated than that. And there's another letter there that we can get to on the other side.
You bet.
But I think that it's just important that we recognize that this conversation is a lot more complicated than maybe headlines make it.
Okay, when we come back, we have Al waiting on the line to visit with you, and several other phone lines open. It's City Talk, and joining us here this morning, we have Ward 4's Mike Nugent, City Councilor. Jenny Miriam is with us, the Director of Communications for the City of Missoula, and they're specifically here to answer your questions. And we're talking about growth in Missoula. It's going to happen, but how it happens is pretty much up to us. So we're going to continue with more of Talk Back and City Talk. Hopefully your phone calls, and use the KGVO app to send in your messages right after this.
Montana State News Network.
I'm Dennis Bragg. A Havre woman is being ordered to spend more than a year and a half in federal prison for lunging at the controls of a small commercial plane, throwing it out of control as the pilot was trying to land. Federal prosecutors say Tracy Lynn Engelman, also known as Tracy Bad Moccasin, started yelling as the Cape Air flight was landing in Havre on a flight from Billings. They say the crew got her back in her seat, but just as the plane was landing, she lunged for the controls, hitting the throttle. That forced the plane to accelerate and veer across the runway before the crew could safely slow the aircraft. She had pled guilty in August. Representative Ryan Zinke believes the military experience of Montana's new congressional delegation will be a plus for the state, and he's especially looking forward to working with new House freshman Troy Downing in the District 2 House seat.
Well, there's 3 combat veterans and a son of a Marine. That's a pretty good lineup there, and I've known Troy a long time. He works tirelessly hard, and he did a great job as a state auditor, which it was a tough role. And I look forward to him being a great voice in the House, and he'll be instantly, I think, one to talk to.
A final check on ballot numbers shows Montanans did an amazing job of returning their vote-by-mail ballots before this week's election. Secretary of State's office says more than 89% of those ballots were returned. If you rent in Montana, double-check your mail for details on a new survey from the state, which helps determine what federal rent subsidies will be. Peter Christian has more details.
I spoke with Housing Division Administrator Cheryl Cohen.
It's under some prescribed federal laws established by HUD, and we're hoping that the data from this study will better inform and better reflect what our actual rental rates are in the state of Montana.
She said the whole idea is to gather information that will convince federal authorities to increase the help with rents for their clients at the Department of Commerce.
So the recipients of the funds have a better chance of getting the assistance they need and to stay stably housed.
Peter Christian, Montana State News Network.
To protect his home and family from disaster, Steve used courage, wisdom, and his camera phone. Way to go, Steve! By simply taking digital pictures of his family's important documents, Steve can always have them stored safely online, no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
I'm sure it'll be very...
Welcome back, everybody. Good to have you along this morning. This is City Talk. I'm Peter Christian. The questions and over there taking your phone calls. Producing Talk Back. Several phone lines are open, by the way. Our guests, Mike Nugent, Ward 4 City Councilor, and Jenny Miriam with the city. And Al is waiting online. Al, good morning, sir. You're on Talk Back. What's your question, please?
I just have 2 questions. The first one would be about the new city fire station that'll be coming sooner or later, hopefully sooner. What's the latest? Anything been decided exactly where at? And the second question would be, how far out Mullen Road does the city limits currently go? Just give me a wild guess, in relation to the golf course out there. How far does the city limits go?
What they call it, a WAG, a wild-ass guess, right?
I don't need to give you a wild guess. I know exactly where it is.
Go ahead, yeah.
The city limits actually, the golf course and that community out there where the Ranch Club Golf Course is like an island of the city in the county. And then between there and kind of the 44 Ranch subdivision is where the edge of the city limits for the rest of it is. So that's why you see a rural fire station out there, and they've kind of got a interlocal agreement for lack of a better word, mutual aid, aid agreement. As to where the fire station's coming, they are wrapping up a study basically right now on where in town it makes sense to plan or to put the next fire station, and maybe acknowledge where the next one, and we're talking long-term planning, might end up as growth patterns.
But there are some of the fire stations in Missoula need to be upgraded and updated, and I'm sure that they need to, because it's growing in their areas as well.
Well, certainly, I would say the city of Missoula fire stations are actually in pretty good shape.
Are they good? That's great.
But there are, just because the community's growing, there's a rural fire station right there on South Avenue that if they were placing that today, it wouldn't go there because it's on it's city on a lot of sides. So it's just as communities grow, they got to figure those things out and kind of work together a little bit. So they're putting the finishing touches on that study, and then they'll have a recommendation that we'll approve and kind of go from there. I think that's the gist of it. I'm looking over at our communications guru here.
And by the way, the phone lines are open. If you have a question from Mike Nugent from Ward 4 City Councilor, he's quite literally here to talk to you. So if you're maybe one of these folks who wrote one of these letters to the editor, or as Ginny was saying when we kicked off the show, there's a wide area of people that seem to think that, by golly, Missoula's just big enough. Thank you very much. We're surrounded by all these mountains. There's no more room to grow. So let's just shut it down and try to deal with what we have here now, that's rather unrealistic.
I mean, if people stopped coming here when we did that could be realistic. But if they don't stop coming here, that's really quickly going to create other problems. I'm going to read this other.
Please do. Yes,
quick.
Go ahead.
To the Missoula City Council, thanks so very much for voting in favor of the future overdevelopment of the South Hills Meadows. By voting in favor of greedy out-of-state developers' visions of how the hillside should look and turning a deaf ear to those of us who reside there was a huge disappointment. I hope next year you will all try and drive up here and enjoy the heavy traffic and construction racket with all of us. The thing that is frustrating, and those are all valid things. If I lived where this gentleman lived, I would probably feel the exact same way. The problem is that feeling isn't a legally defensible fact based on conclusions of law that we can cite in a land use decision. And we're bound by that. That is state law. That is a whole lot of case law, both at the state level and the federal level, on private property rights. And the parcel they're talking about it's in the middle of the city. It's surrounded by city on all sides.
Right.
And there is a little bit of protected open space down below it already. But it's been, the potential for that to be open space has been there, but it's not continuously connected to anything like some of the ranches higher up that have conservation easements on them. So it wasn't necessarily the best route for that sort of money investment either. And we don't, if the city wants to do that, they have to buy that from someone. They can't just say, your ranch is now open space, as Ginny was getting at earlier. But the other thing that in this letter that I just think is fair, nobody wants to live next to a construction zone. No matter where housing is approved in this community, the people who live next to it aren't going to want to live.
Can't just snap your finger and have a development appear.
And one of the things that's always interesting on council is when people who live in the first phase of a subdivision come in and complain about future phases of that exact subdivision that was approved all at the same time, because it's just so interesting because they're experiencing what their neighbors experienced when they protested against it in the first place.
Right.
Which is, we like to live next to this open space, even though the open space isn't parkland, it's private property, and we're limited on how we can control that.
All right, we do have another caller. Let's get Jeff on the line. Jeff, good morning, sir. You're on Talkback with Mike Nugent and Ginny Miriam. Go ahead, please.
Hey, good morning. I actually, in the military, we used to have a saying. It was a scientific wild ass guess, or a swag. So
I'm going to use that. I like that.
Go for it.
I love that.
Yes. So make sure you're using science. Follow the science on a wild ass guess. I guess the ability of people to be hypocrites never ceases to amaze me. There's, the NIMBY principle is what's coming to mind here. Not in my backyard. It was okay for me to build here, but I'm closing the gate after I get here, and nobody else can come in. And that I'm sorry you have to deal with that, but that's pretty much going to be human nature, and that's what they pay you the big bucks on city council for, is to have to face those kinds of things. But at a more 50,000 foot view, you hit the nail on the head that people are not going to be able to afford to live, not just in Missoula, but western Montana. I mean, that has popped up all over, and you can see it in Whitefish. You can see it at Big Sky, definitely. And now you can see it in Missoula and Bozeman that it's becoming little Aspens, little San Franciscos, little, elite communities where, yes, we don't want the little folks in here taking care of us. Don't ruin my life by having a life of your own. And it's just going to get worse, I'm afraid. I'm sorry that it is, but I just don't see it getting better. So I think spines have to stiffen on city council and tell people, private property is private property. Somebody owns that land. If you don't want it developed, buy it. And otherwise, we used to have another saying in the military: sit down, shut up, and color. You don't have a right to say anything here. So,
well, I probably won't borrow that one when I'm talking on the council floor.
Yeah.
But I mean, you hit it on the head. And I think that, in this week of an election that clearly divided the country, if we're looking for unifying things, there's nothing more unifying than the bipartisan movement of people not wanting something built next to them. It is very, very unifying. And I think that, NIMBYism is something that people get a little bit sensitive to, but it's very real. Yeah. And it's not necessarily a wrong instinct, but we need to look at the bigger picture. And this is why I think code reform is so important. You look at some of these communities in the western United States that tried to kind of control growth through overly restrictive zoning. And what has happened is they are communities that have become so expensive to live in that the people who work in them can't afford it. And the people who are moving in just keep driving up the housing prices, and there's nothing left. So, that's something as we go into break and we get on the other side, I think we can talk about that a little bit more.
Absolutely. And the phone lines are open at 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309. Mike Nugent and Ginny Merriam are here to talk with you. And so if you have a question or comment about growth in Missoula, new developments in Missoula, new neighborhoods going in, I know you have an opinion. And if you'd like to talk with a gentleman who deals with it every single day in city council, as well as with Ginny, they're here to talk to you. So we're coming right back after this timeout.
Hey, John.
Hey, welcome back to Talk Back, everybody. 721-1290 is our number. It's City Talk going on right now. And again, I want to say thank you to the mayor of the city council and Ginny for helping to set up City Talk. And of course, we also do County Talk as often as we can to give our listeners who are tax-paying folks an opportunity to actually speak directly with the folks who represent them. I think that's pretty cool stuff. And we appreciate Mike Nugent being here today. Let's get Fred on the line. He's been waiting. Fred, good morning, sir. You're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Good morning. I have a question. I want to know why the city spent $350,000 for open space between Evero and Snowball that nobody can use.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Easy enough. So one of the things that, the community over the years, and Ginny referenced covering this in the 90s and people being concerned about growth, the community probably 30 years ago said, we want to invest in open space. And the community, I think 3 times has voted for open space bonds. And each time they've kind of specified in those bonds what goals they have. And a lot of that more recently, especially is in the Missoula area, has been like, what can we do with parks? And we've improved our park spaces. We just approved, or will be asked to approve soon, a park swap basically in the north side to get a larger park there. But some of that bond also called for protecting agriculture lands. And you see this kind of investment in open space around Missoula, Mount Sentinel, Dean Stone, the North Hills, Jumbo, where over the years, and Peter, I know you've been here, I'm speaking as someone who's covered it all, the communities believed in investing in all of that. And so the last round of the open space bond, which was 2018, which was before I was on council, so we are being guided by what the voters said in 2018, and basically they allotted the city and the county a certain amount of money and said, we want you to protect open space and do these things. And one of them talked about access to recreational areas, so rivers and trails. One of them talked about protecting ag space. One of them talked about parks, and they were all within there. And so what happened earlier this week is that the county came to the city because we kind of have a bubble area and said, hey, this is a parcel that meets what the voters said. We would like to use a portion of our open space allotment dollars and a portion of your open space dollar allotment to put an easement on this that permanently protects it as basically an area that could be potential for agriculture, allows wildlife to kind of come and go, protect some view shed, and that was part of that open space bond. I do think, and I said so on the council floor on Wednesday, that that era, I think, is kind of closing up on this open space bond because of the growth we're feeling. Council really is feeling that the remainder of those funds really should be directed more towards parks and open spaces that we have access to and things like that. But that, I think it's important for people to know that that money didn't come out of the general fund. That was approved in 2018 and has been part of your tax bill. And you have to follow what people voted on, and protecting ag space was one of those things because the community value at the time, and I believe that this is still there for a large portion of the community, was as we grow and as we feel pressures, we want to make sure that we have done what we can to protect this in some places.
Does that help you, Fred?
Well, yeah, but you got a lot of area out by the Y that's agriculture that now they're putting a housing development in. So, that ain't really protecting nothing.
Well, but the thing there is what we were talking about earlier. The city can only help put a conservation easement on something if the private landowner wants to be a partner in that. So if the private property owner, which is a lot of that space by the Y where you're starting to see developments get approved by the county, not the city, I want to say, by the county.
Right.
If the landowner doesn't want to put a conservation easement on that, we can't make them because, again, that goes back to the kind of the takings provisions and a lot of case law on that.
It's private property.
So if that person had come to, the city and the county and Five Valleys Land Trust and all that said, hey, we want to work on protecting our agriculture land, that would have been something that, maybe we could work on. But if that's not the route they want to go, we can't do that.
Okay, Fred, thank you for the call. We appreciate it, sir. Tell you what, we're a minute away from a break. I want to give Emmett plenty of time to ask his question. By the way, several phone lines still open. If you have a question or a comment for Mike Nugent, City Councilor from Ward 4. Ginny Miriam is also here in the studio with us, Communications Director for the city. City Talk is for you, and we would love to have your calls, your comments about new developments in Missoula. What do you think? We would love to answer your questions when we come back right after this.
Explore the country.
We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. All right, let's get Emmett. He's been waiting very patiently. Emmett, good morning. You're on with Mike Nugent and Ginny Miriam. What's your question, please?
Oh, thanks for taking my call. Well, it's more of an observation, I believe, on why many people don't want so much development in Missoula and worried about Missoula being ruined. I'd like to illustrate it with a true story, from my own childhood. Have you ever heard of Lewiston, Idaho? I used to live there when I was 13 through age 16. It was a beautiful small town. It was more out of a Norman Rockwell painting. I don't have the time to describe how beautiful it was, but when I tried to move back, the city council was in the process of getting new development, new businesses, new people to come to Lewiston, Idaho, and change it into like a New York-style type of thing, because they wanted to energize Lewiston, Idaho. A lot of people moved out. There was a lot of development, and pretty much the whole town just was so completely changed. It was ruined. And I myself would like to see Missoula, Montana go back to the size and the way it was in 1984-85 when I first moved here. And I have seen changes in Missoula. So how would you address my concerns and the concerns of so many others that we want to keep the small town feel? So I could go on forever and ever, but I don't have time.
Let's let Mike address that. But he had his hand up, so go ahead. Yeah. Thanks for the call.
Thanks for your thoughts. I think that the first and most important thing to maybe ask is, What do you think the people that moved here in 1965 felt about you moving here in 1985? Because that is the big thing. Like we have this kind of rotating concern where it's like, I moved here for whatever reason, but now I don't want anybody else to be able to move here. And that doesn't work. And, we can talk about going back to the size it was in 1985, but
it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's like we have to live in the world we're in right now, and we have to acknowledge that we, in the United States of America, we don't get to tell people they can't try and move where they want to move. And if there isn't space, they're going to come and buy something. It's going to drive up the price, and then someone else isn't going to be able to be here. So we can put our head in the sand and pretend that we're not going to grow, or we can try and meet it. And the city is really trying their best they can with this, but also, investing in projects that will create permanent affordable housing. The Rivera project off Scott Street is a big kind of, it's going to be the biggest community land trust residential ownership housing project in the state.
For those who don't understand community land trust, it's a very interesting proposition that does make for affordable housing. You don't own the land, but you own the house.
Yeah, the land trust owns the land, and you own the house that it's on.
Exactly. All right. Let's continue on and get Ed. Ed, thanks for holding. You're on Talkback with Mike Nugent and Ginny Merriam. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm one of the folks who thinks that Larchmont is not off the table. I know the county did a study of all of its properties, but really didn't put that to bed. First of all, the county, as I understand it, owns the land, right? And it uses city sewer and water, so the city has some connection there. Would it be possible to use open space money to make some sort of improvement, even small improvement, to take Larchmont off the table as far as developing housing?
I don't think that you could use open space money to take Larchmont off the table. That's a county thing. So there's a lot of technicalities of kind of the ownership history and how the county came to own that I'm less familiar with. But I'll tell you that as we were last week talking about the council considering approving the MRA to purchase land by Southgate Mall to kind of grid it out to try and get some affordable housing in there and a little bit of master planning right there in the middle of town. When you pull up the satellite view, and that's 13 acres, and then you look a couple blocks to the left and you see Larchmont that is significantly bigger than that, and you kind of see what people are talking about when they bring that up. It's a county decision. And the reality is that if the county ever decided to do something there, they would probably have housing that would be annexed into the city. But I don't actually see that being something that comes to fruition anytime soon.
If you want to have a revolution, just mess with a golfer.
And I'm just going to say that as a city elected official, that is not in my decision space.
Yeah.
So we'll ask the county about that.
All right. Thank you for the call, sir. All right. Let's get Susan on the line next. Susan, good morning. You're on Talkback. Go ahead, please.
I'm going to start out by apologizing to your excellent guest, but this is the only time I have to quickly announce that Monday is Veterans Day, and I'm in charge of the 98th annual Veterans Day service at the Missoula County Courthouse in front of the Doughboy. It will be on November 11th at 11 a.m., the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th hour. Our beautiful mayor is going to be there along with all of our veterans, and it's not just for veterans to attend, it's for anybody. We would love to see a huge crowd celebrate all of our wonderful veterans in Missoula. We have a ton of veterans, and there also are 2 breakfasts going on at the American Legion Post 27 and VFW Post 209, and thank you, and I'm sorry to be off topic.
No problem. Thanks for the call. Thanks for that reminder.
Okay.
And it's always good to know Susan has got our back when it comes to patriotic things.
I was going to say, when I saw her name on the call list, I figured that she would announce this because she's very involved in that.
You bet. Absolutely. We love her for it. Let's get Walt on the line next. Walt, good morning. Thanks for holding. Go ahead. What's up, sir?
Well, good morning, everybody. Listen, my wife and I walk out of Maclay Flats a lot, and then after our hurricane went through, there was a tremendous number of trees down. And I know you're tied with the city. I don't know if the city's involved with Maclay Flats or not, but my question is, with all the down trees, does the city do anything to utilize that resource? In other words, is it used for like firewood? Is it used for merchantable timber in some cases? And I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Walt.
Thank you.
Merchantable timber, probably not. But the first big chunk of all that debris actually went to the compost area.
Right.
But it filled it so quickly that then they had to, especially with the emergency declaration, they had to find outside contractors to come take it. And my understanding, and Ginny can correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of the excess is being broken down and shipped other places where it'll be used. It'll be put to use.
Now, do we have to pay them to take it, or do they pay us to take it? I really don't know. I'm just curious.
It's actually a little bit of both, Peter. It's kind of interesting.
Okay.
As Mike said, our Garden City compost filled up very quickly and within a matter of days after the storm. And we contracted with a company to come and chip these brush piles and tree limbs on site. And part of their payment for doing this service was they took the chips. And I know, for instance, one of the companies was going to sell the chips to a firm in Idaho that makes compost lawn products.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And with that, we're up against our final break. Bill is waiting very patiently to talk with Mike Nugent and Ginny Merriam. City Talk is only an hour. We only have about 8 minutes left. So if you have a question about development in Missoula, give us a call, 721-1290. We'll be back in 1 minute. We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. This is City Talk for the next, 7.5 minutes or so, and more calls coming in. Let's get Bill on. Bill, good morning. Thanks for holding. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. The question I had is we have new development in town, especially with commercial on a lot of our main streets that people see daily, but the city requires a certain amount of grass and trees to be planted and to make the town beautiful. But then you go down the road just a little bit and there'll be another business that's been there for a while, but they don't have any of that. For example, you have a new bank on Broadway being built right next to Rankich Brothers, and they're going to be putting in trees and grass, but then you get over to Rankich Brothers and they don't have anything to help out with that. I mean, is that something that the city's working on to get these companies, so everybody's doing the same? Because I just don't, if we're going to try to make Missoula nice and
sure, kind of retroactive zoning things like that. But go ahead, please. Yes, and thanks for the call.
It's a good question, a fair question. The reality is that when someone is doing a project, whether it's building permit or subdivision or whatever, what the city has in place at that moment in terms of building codes, regulations, things like that, are really what govern it. But it's very hard for the city to go back and say, hey, we've changed now. We want you to do more, because again, that telling people what to do on their private property when they aren't making another substantial change or anything like that. There are parts of town where, especially in urban renewal districts, where the MRA has been able to invest in kind of sidewalks and infrastructure. But I don't know of anything in the immediate future that would have money to kind of beautify spots of that aren't. It's just kind of natural change you see over time. And
it's very difficult.
Probably, I will say, as somebody who enjoys private property rights, it's probably good that the city can't just come and tell you have to invest this and this and this and this all the time. There are situations, though, like sidewalks in certain areas where the city kind of makes the decision that this is for the better good and we need to do this.
It's very difficult and expensive to do it retroactively. All right, let's get Skip on the line. Skip, good morning. You're on Talkback with Mike Nugent and Ginny Merriam. Go ahead.
And thank you, Peter, and gentlemen, and Mike especially. I live down here in Ravalli County, and I kind of watch what's going on in Missoula City and Missoula County, kind of like a barometer for the future of what we might be looking at down here in Ravalli County, a few different issues. So And Hamilton, of course, I live south of Hamilton, but I watch that as it's developing, its thinking, and the way it's going to face the future, and then how Missoula is doing it now. So, being in the city, Mike, do you think that this other than just identifying problems, do you feel like some solutions are coming up? And then do you think that what might make some things happen quicker is that there's in fact a mayoral election coming up sooner than later, than before the next big election cycle? Can you give me some input on that?
Thanks for the call.
Well, I mean, I'll just answer that last question first by saying that obviously the mayor and I ran against each other, but we've become good friends, and I think she's doing a great job and am on the mayor's team for her vision for the future. I think that it takes more than 9 months to figure out how you can make a serious change in something like this, but I think the code reform process is our opportunity to do just that. But what's interesting is the state laws that changed in the last legislative session that really dictated that cities and counties have to do more broad planning around development and kind of what their future is. And one of the requirements is that localities have to project the growth that they expect and what that translates to in needed units. And that actually is something that I think is really important as we're considering subdivisions and things like that, where the city every year is going to have to project, like, based on the growth patterns, we expect the community to grow 0.25% next year. It's more than that, but 0.25% next year, and that translates to X number of housing starts. We need 300 more units. And the number right now of units that we need in Missoula is higher than that. It's like 2,000 plus.
Really?
That's a countywide number, not just the city. And so I actually think that is a big change that is good because it's going to force governments to plan for this reality. And I actually think that's better in places like Ravalli County or even smaller, more rural counties who really don't necessarily tackle growth and planning the way some of the larger communities do.
Okay, so go ahead, Nick, please. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we have an app question from Joel. He said, what percentage of the current housing inventory, to include single-family homes, are owned by out-of-state corporations or LLCs? I'm concerned that investment firms have negatively influenced the local housing market.
Interesting.
You know, I will tell you, as somebody who works in the local housing market, but has also done, sat on boards that have invested in affordable housing, the Missoula Housing Authority, sitting on council. I've kind of seen this from all perspectives. The concern about national entities owning single-family housing in Missoula is significantly overblown. There are corporate ownership of single-family houses, but they're usually LLCs of people who own a rental or two or three. Now, apartments are a different story, and you see some of these large-scale apartment complexes, and they are owned by large corporate entities. The question is what type of corporate entity, because if it's just a housing fund that's trying to do everything it can to invest and then move on and it's tied to the stock market, that's where you get a little bit worried. But if it is more of an industry, a company that's into creating housing opportunities, that might be a different story. The reality is that we need better data on this front, but it is not as prevalent in the single family across Montana as people think it is. There are pockets in Montana where you can see it.
We got about a minute left. So if folks want to get more information on this, come to a city council meeting every now and then, or at least view it online, and you can participate online as well. It's on Zoom. Everybody can participate. You can make it very accessible. So how can they get in touch with you and the folks at the city council?
I mean, we have a website that makes it pretty easy to reach out to your city council member or to all of us. Mm-hmm. You can see the agendas every week. You can see what's happening. Also, a good place is Engage Missoula, which kind of outlines everything that the city's tackling and how they can get involved.
I want to say thank you to both of you. Really appreciate it. And thanks for the calls. We appreciate it. Jenny, good to see you again.
Thank you.
All right. And Mr. Nick, what's coming up on Monday's fabulous program, sir? First of all, we got to say go Grizz coming up tomorrow night. It's a late night game, folks, so bring your nightie. So go ahead, Nick.
I'm going to be out on Monday. I'm going to be out the next handful of Mondays, so we are going to do a best of on Monday, but we will be live the following Monday and the one after that. But best of on Monday, we'll be back on Tuesday with the Mansfield Center.
All right. You guys get out there and make it a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy and go Grizz against UC Davis. Take care, everybody.